Welcome to Wining and Dining with Jim White. Today, pleased to introduce you to one of New Zealand's top winemakers from the legendary Saint Clair Family Estates in beautiful Marlborough. Hamish Clark, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks for having me.
And welcome to the States. Is this your first trip?
This is first trip to Southern States, first time in Texas.
Welcome to Texas.
Thank you.
Now you've seen all you need to see.
Yeah, plenty to see.
You know, you could be declared a sort of an honorary Texan, because the motto here is if you weren't born in Texas, you'll never be a Texan, of course. But they all say, got here as soon as I could.
Yeah, no, I like it, Jim. Thank you.
You know, I was looking back through Karen McNeil's wonderful wine Bible, the first edition that she signed for us in 2001, and they were talking about New Zealand. I think it comprised all of about 10 pages in her book. And it said, I just want to give a little quote here. New Zealand, 33rd in wine production in the world, 28th in consumption, exciting but tiny by world standards. So this was 2001, about the time you joined Saint Clair.
That's right, yeah.
How has winemaking overall changed in New Zealand since Karen McNeil called it exciting but tiny by world standards?
It's actually, it's a very good lead-in, because 2001 was when I got back home, was when I got into the wine industry. Up until that point, it was very much a boutique, domestic, mainly focused domestically in terms of consumption. From the late 90s through to where we are now, we just started to come onto the radar on the international stage. UK especially took a bit of interest, and those early years, early 2000s, it was exciting. There was an energy and an electricity in the atmosphere, and it was like nothing I'd ever sort of experienced before. There was a number of new players coming into the industry. It was just really, really exciting times. It felt like, and I've described it before like this, it felt like holding onto a skyrocket. It was going up fast, didn't necessarily have too much direction, and we knew at some stage the bubble had to pop. We just couldn't keep growing as fast as what it was growing, but super exciting times to be involved during that period.
You know, again, in Karen's book, she talks about first vines being planted about 1819, but it took about 150 years to get a solid wine industry to get
that takes it back a very long time. In Marlborough, and that was talking New Zealand in general. There was vines that were planted back in the late 1800s, sort of up around Auckland. In Marlborough, the first sort of commercial plantings got going in sort of 1974. Mm-hmm. I'm getting my centuries mixed up there.
It's easy to do.
Yeah. Saint Clair, Neil and Judy Ibbotson got their grapes on the go 1978, to put a wee bit of context on that. So not too long after the first commercial plantings were made, Neil and Judy got into the game. And then 1994, they established Saint Clair as a brand, as a label.
Well, I want to talk about your background with them, but I think it would be very interesting for people to talk a little more about the Ibbotsons and Marlborough. I mean, they're real pioneers in the rise of Marlborough as one of the world's great wine making regions.
Yeah. Yeah, well, no, we're very lucky. Well, I'm very lucky as well. I grew up with the Ibbotson family. I went to school with their children, so I've known the family for a long time. And I kind of just stumbled back into the wine industry, I guess. I had 2 years off before I went to university. I didn't know what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be.
Like most kids.
And I had a dabble in I'd worked a couple of vintages for a champagne, or a method champagne maker. And then disappeared overseas, and at that stage I wasn't really wine focused.
Let me interrupt you there. Let's talk about that, because I think people will get a kick out of your background. I got microbiology, and then you were in the UK for the Forensic Science Service, which is the UK's version of America's favorite television show, CSI.
And again, I sort of landed on my feet there a little bit. I worked in Australia for a year, just in hospitality, just living the Australian dream, I guess. Surfing during the daytime, and working the lunchtime and evening shifts. I then went on to the UK. Again, worked in bars because it's so expensive there, and my money just evaporated. So I had to do something while I was looking for a proper job. I'm not saying that working bars is not a proper job, but you don't go to university to pull pints. My first serious job, I guess, outside of university was I got picked up in a recruitment drive looking for young science graduates to train up to perform DNA analysis. The UK had just launched a couple of years ago, had brought into place a thing called the Criminal Justice Bill, which meant that everybody that was arrested had to submit a cheek cell scraping. And before they knew it, they amassed thousands and thousands of these samples as backlogs, and we were brought on board to try and clear some of that backlog. So
Okay.
we got trained up in how to perform the analysis and how to basically read those output files and load them up to the database.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So then how did you make the jump into winemaking from there?
Well, it was really a function of ending up back in Marlborough as much as anything. My time in the UK came to an end. I was on a 2-year work visa. I put the backpack back on for another 6 months and travelled sort of through Scotland, which is where my heritage is. I spent 2 years there, and it was really the last couple of weeks that I actually managed to get back to actually why I went to the UK in the first place. I did manage to get to Scotland. I ended up back in hometown Blenheim, which is in the province of Marlborough. A credit card that was loaded up with nothing left to give, and a backpack full of dirty t-shirts, and knocking on the door saying, "Mum, do you mind if I stay for a bit while I get some money back?" And I had a good friend that I went to through university with that was in the wine industry, and she suggested, "Why don't I work in the lab? I've got all the lab skills. Find it a bit of a doddle to work a wine vintage in the lab," and that's exactly what I did. It was for a joint venture company back in those days, and the joint venture company was with 3 very small companies back in those days. A little company called Cape Campbell, family owned. Another small family owned winery that is now a much bigger company owned one called Kim Crawford. And this was with the original Kim Crawford, the man himself, and Neil and Judy Ibbotson. And combined, we were tiny. We were crushing, in terms of wine bottles, we might have been doing 4,000 bottles each company, so nothing in terms of what we are today. And especially if you look at the bigger corporate side of Kim, etc. And this is just the potential that Marlborough has become. You just see the amazing appetite for growth and success, and the uplift or the recognition that Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is getting it's bordering on unprecedented. There's not too many other countries that have such a small output of wine that are commanding the price points we're able to command. So we find ourselves in a very unique position, and we need to be careful. We need to be guardians of that.
Very well said.
Yeah.
I like that concept. Yes, the flavors that just pop out of the glass, or in the case of produce, pop off the plate because they're so vibrant. Talk a little bit, Hamish, about the differences for those of us who haven't had the pleasure of being in New Zealand, but we'll get there as soon as we can. Talk about the differences between North Island winemaking and South Island winemaking, where Marlborough is located, and where, of course, Saint Clair is located.
Yeah. The main differences really come down to the temperature during the daytime. Marlborough, New Zealand as a whole is a very, very skinny little country surrounded by ocean, and as part of that, we have a very maritime growing climate. It doesn't really matter where you are in New Zealand. I guess Central Otago could be classed as a small exception. They're located sort of further inland in a big basin surrounded by mountains. They're slightly more continental than maritime, but the main difference is really the North Island wine growing regions experience the warmer daytime temperatures. They grow or are capable of growing the Bordeaux style varieties, whereas we just don't generate enough daytime heat in Marlborough, and certainly not further south either. But those cooler maritime temperatures, that's really what allows us to get that concentration. It locks in the flavours, locks in the acidity, which is really important. If you start having the acidity dropping out because of high temperatures, then you start losing flavour at the same time.
Well, now speaking of those cooler temperatures, you were remarking about winter has really hit in New Zealand just before you got here to wonderful summertime in Texas. So you've just had, because of that, a harvest for 2018. What are the prospects like?
2018 we got off to an incredible start. We had the most amazing December, which is December time in New Zealand. This is where the grapes go through their flowering period. It's where the crop sets itself up from. And we just had day after day after day of 22, 23, 24 degree days. Some as high as 27, which again, we don't usually see that many days one after the other.
That's around 80 degrees Celsius, I think.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Right,
yeah.
Just for folks in case you're keeping score. Okay.
and then January and February, we had almost sort of 10-day. It wouldn't get more than 14 days before we'd have another decent top up of rain. So 20 or 30 millimetres of rain, getting close to an inch of rain, and then it would go hot again. And so we just had the most incredible, vigorous growing season as well. And for some of the varieties, that's not 100% ideal, but yeah, things are shaping up pretty well. And then we started to get challenged by the weather a little bit. The flavours were there, the concentration was there, but we just had a few more regular rain events that just started seeing a bit of disease pressure on the horizon, and all the wine companies around the district had pressed the go button at that stage. The writing was on the wall that if we tried to hold the fruit for too long on the vine, then we'd be taking fruit of lesser quality. So it was a scramble, but very, very pleased with the concentration and flavours. Having that very, very good early warm period in December did bring those flavours and ripeness forward a little. So we harvested earlier than what we'd normally do, and I'm really pleased with them. And I think most winemakers around Marlborough would agree that it's certainly been a vintage that's had its challenges, but it's rewarded as well.
That's wonderful. Now, when will we get to taste the 2018 vintage?
Not quite yet.
Yeah. How long do we have to wait?
Preparation is to have stock in warehouse October.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
And then
so I'm guessing December.
Okay. Wonderful. We can wait until December for one of the most awarded wines in New Zealand. Yeah. Certainly, your Saint Clair wines. How does that make you feel? Again, I see on your website more awards for Sauvignon Blanc than any of the other 300 or 400 producers.
Yeah.
I think you're holding that standard high, as you alluded.
Yeah, and this is something I really attribute to Neil and Judy, the owners of Saint Clair. From that very, very small base, they learnt very quickly that in a wine growing area where nobody really knows, there was no precedent, there's no sort of benchmark even, that in order to gain knowledge as quickly as we could meant keeping vineyard parcels separate. It meant investing in the best wine making equipment and people that we could, and that philosophy remains. We're a bigger family-owned wine company than what we were back in those days, but we found that we learnt by keeping all those vineyard parcels separate, by assessing them as wine rather than just looking at the fruit on the vine, assessing them as wine and giving them a grade or a score. We were quite quickly able to build a heat map of what soils, what areas within the Marlborough area gave us the best flavour profiles, and then started to really focus in on securing land or contract growers in those areas where we thought the flavours were best. And that sort of philosophy sort of underpins, I guess, how and why Saint Clair was able to quickly build a very solid reputation out in the marketplace. We discovered a very special area in the Dillon's Point area. This area hadn't been planted. We were the first first company to start taking fruit out of that area, and this is back in the early 2000s. We had our first insights into what the quality was like, and that very first little vineyard that we took fruit from there, we knew we had a winner. And we were quite protective. We were almost secretive about where this fruit was coming from because we knew it was so good that we just didn't want people to know. And we now, we don't dominate, but we have a significant stakeholding down in that particular area. Not a big area, but very, very fertile soils.
Now, here in the States, are we going to get to taste any of your wines except the Sauvignon Blanc? I mean, that's certainly good enough. I didn't mean to say that's a consolation prize, but I know you make a range of wines in New Zealand. Are they all distributed in the United States, or are you just concentrating on the Sauvignon Blanc?
At this stage, generally just concentrating on the Sauvignon Blanc. We'll get a good solid base, and I guess those are discussions for further down the track.
Okay.
But we're more than happy with that. The Sauvignon Blanc is what Marlborough is best known for. It's certainly our bread and butter. It's by percentage volume, it accounts for about 70% of our total production. Yeah, so it's a big one for us. So
there's another Texas saying, "Dance with the one that brung you." So that
I like that.
And I believe the Sauvignon Blanc brought you to the party.
That's right.
Well, let's talk about the one that is currently available and in release, the beautiful Sauvignon Blanc that you brought with us to taste today.
Sure.
Just give us some of the flavor profiles and characteristics. Any stories you want to tell about its particular harvest, etc.
Yeah. Okay, 2017 harvest. Again, we've had a couple of vintages in a row that have put us winemakers to the task and given us a few curveballs and challenges. 2017 was again a vintage where we got a bit of rain as we came into the vintage window, and unlike I guess the 2018 vintage where the sugar ripeness was there. We were sort of looking for, at that stage we're really just picking on flavours as the best they could be, which delivered us delivered us as winemakers some pretty interesting challenges, especially for the red varieties. The red varieties, I guess, things like Pinot, very, very good, beautiful berry size, but we do wonder how that vintage would have transpired had we not had that rain. So for the Sauvignon Blanc, the Sauvignon, the flavours are still really good, very crisp, slightly more herbaceous because we just didn't have that full hang time that we normally would have enjoyed. But yeah, we're pleased with it. I think the 2018 vintage is a step up on 2017.
So we'll find out in December.
You will find out sometime as the vintages roll. Yeah.
Well,
it's more the 2018. I guess Jim putting in context. 2018 is what I personally feel is more classic Saint Clair in style.
Okay.
I've been criticised before about being a bit critical about our wines, and I guess as winemakers we tend to do that. Tend to look inwards and focus inwards and criticise and look at our mistakes if we've made any. And
Well, talk in general about the essence of what makes the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc so alluring, gives it that flavor profile. Just talk in general terms, even from year to year, notwithstanding differences in climate conditions and so forth.
I think why Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is what it is because the soils are geographically quite young compared to our neighbours or other countries that are growing Sauvignon Blanc. Geographically they're young, they're still very fertile, and we now know, many years down the track, we know that Sauvignon Blanc is one of a handful of varieties that really thrives in high fertility soils. Most other varieties, you would look to the poorer soils or the ones that make the vines struggle along a little bit. But Sauvignon really thrives in high fertility soils, which Marlborough has across the valley, but it has pockets of super fertility, I guess, for lack of better words. We touched on the fact that it's a maritime climate, and this is very important for maintaining the flavours. The nighttime temperatures, we've got a big shift between daytime and nighttime temperatures, what's referred to as diurnal range. So we can go from 27, 28 degree growing temperature through the daytime down to 12, 13, 14 degrees over the nighttime. So it's almost like putting the fruit in the fridge, waiting for the sun to come back up again. So we're not seeing acid degradation happening overnight, and we're not seeing flavour loss due to that. And so we end up with a very concentrated expression of Sauvignon.
And I think, to my taste, the premier food wine in terms of food wine pairings. Yeah. It just, of course, you have to be careful. I'm not putting a rare steak with a Saint Clair Sauvignon Blanc, but you know what I'm saying. Talk about some of those that you find particularly enjoyable, because I know St. Clair has a kitchen and hospitality and a lot of other wonderful things going on. And of course, food and wine is the perfect marriage.
Yeah, no, that's right. One of the things I really enjoy is Sauvignon Blanc and lawnmowers, funnily enough. It's one of my go-tos if I'm out pushing the mower around the lawns, cutting the lawns, then Sauvignon Blanc goes especially well with it. Yeah, it's a nice hot summer day, but I guess a little more seriously on the food front, it does do very well with fish dishes, salads. One of the things I quite like is melon wrapped in prosciutto. You get the saltiness of the prosciutto and the flavours of the melon. They complement the Sauvignon, well, the Sauvignon expression that we make anyway. And I guess talking about that, the expression that we typically see within the Saint Clair Sauvignons is a little bit of grapefruit, a little bit of yellow or sometimes pink grapefruit. But the real key ones are the passion fruit, the blackcurrant characters. A little bit of gooseberry, not too much of that though. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your role and relationship with the team, because I know you have a very strong team of winemakers, and you're senior winemaker, of course, and viticulturalist. How does that all come down on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, no, we do. We have a very good, strong, very stable team. The winemakers that are in place have been there since really mid-2000s, which is a testament to Neil and Judy Ibbotson having a company that looks after their staff, and it's a happy, fun environment to live in and work in. I guess from a very small base, that initially there was only the wine master, cellar master, I should say. I was the lab technician, and then back in those days, St. Clair's winemaker was a consulting winemaker. And so from those early days back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we've now gone to a team of having 5 winemakers on board, which I head up that team. We've got 7 cellar staff, 1 cellar master, and then a team over in the admin that are running the administration side of the business that number about 20. So it's family owned, but it's a big-ish family-owned business in terms of New Zealand wine companies.
What was the transition like going from a school kid growing up with their kids to winemaker with Judy and Neil?
I think a little bit the same. Their children grew up having worked in the vineyards, having been involved with planting, Neil and Judy's early ones, and they were like, no way do we want to get into this stupid wine business. And so the only one still left in their original chosen profession is Tony, who's the middle son. He's very clever. He's a graphic designer. He specialises in beverage packaging. So of course does all St. Clair packaging and artwork, but also has some very other big accounts that he works with as well. Serena, who's the eldest, she studied to be a primary school teacher and was a primary school teacher for a number of years. And then Julie Ibbotson, who's the youngest of the daughters, she was a nurse for a number of years. Ah. And I think it must have been about 2002, 2003 that they first started having a small interest back in the company again. They, I think, like many people, could see the potential that was on the horizon for wine, New Zealand Sauvignon, or Marlborough Sauvignon. And they thought, well, you know what? Maybe it is time to sit up and have a look and get some interest here. And so both Julie and Serena have studied wine marketing and joined the team in that role. There is a bit of succession planning happening at the moment as well, which no doubt will see the daughters especially step into the roles as Neil looks to hand over the reins. Yeah.
Keep that a family business.
That's right. Yeah.
You're described in some areas online as a fishing fanatic. How does that play out?
I think fanatic is somebody that's able to go and do it as much as I'd like to. I love it. I love growing up in New Zealand or growing up in Marlborough. You're surrounded by oceans and water. I used to swim competitively, which sees just about all my sports water-based, water polo, surfing, diving, spearfishing, and then of course fishing, sitting in a boat fishing as well. So no, I love it. I just love being out there doing it, really.
And how do you balance the demands of being a busy winemaker with those of a family? I know you have children, and
It's tough, and sometimes it's a bit hard to get the weight off one end of the balance. But you know what, my kids and kids are amazing. They're so resilient. It blows me away. At vintage time, we have a nanny that comes to help us. But the kids are out, they know what it's all about. They know that when they don't see me all day, that I'm out in the vineyards. They've been for rides on grape harvesters, they've been grape sampling. Jean, who's my eldest daughter, she's just turned 6, but when she was sort of a year and a half old, she would come in a little backpack on my back and sample grapes. Didn't much like the Sauvignon Blanc, but loved the sweet Gewürztraminer or the Pinot Gris. Any of those less acidic ones, you'd see this little hand come out from behind in the backpack. You'd see it reach out and grab a berry or a grape berry off. So they've been part of what is the wine lifestyle or the winemaker's lifestyle for a long time. Yeah.
I've got to ask you, because it caught my eye rather quickly as I was doing a little net surfing to find out a little bit more about you. Does anybody ever confuse you with the Scottish actor Hamish Clark? Or the TV guy in New Zealand.
I have actually had a couple of emails that should have been to the news presenter or reporter. Yeah. But no, it's not. It's not too bad.
I thought that was a curious coincidence. Any relation? You said you had Scottish heritage.
I do have Scottish heritage, but no.
Okay.
No, I'm sure there's more than that. Sure, there's plenty of Hamishes in Scotland as well.
Well, maybe some of his royalty checks will show up to you by mistake. That would be nice, wouldn't it? What about coming to visit? I had said at the beginning, far too many people have not had the pleasure of seeing beautiful New Zealand, and I mean, of course, they've seen it in movies and just fantastic backgrounds and backdrops and so forth. But could we actually visit with you in Marlborough at Saint Clair?
Absolutely, yeah. Saint Clair has a very good setup for receiving guests. It's called the Vineyard Kitchen, where you can simply come along to taste the wines. It's nestled in amongst a vineyard, so you get the real vine experience, I guess. The winery is in a separate location, but we're more than happy to receive guests. But it's more on an appointment sort of basis.
I see, and that's all easy to, I guess, direct to your beautiful
absolutely.
website.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, we're happy to show people through.
So one New Zealand winemaker that I met many years ago described it as the journey of a bottle of wine and 3 movies, or 3 bottles of wine and a movie to Auckland. But is that the destination people need to set their sights on and then hop to the South Island, Marlborough?
Yeah, I think Auckland is the biggest city. It's got the biggest international airport. If you're lucky enough, you might be able to get a direct into Wellington, but I don't know whether you can from the States or not. So yeah, Auckland is where you'd land.
So it's pretty easy to get there, no matter how many bottles of wine or how many movies you've seen on the journey.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we look forward to doing that. We look forward to seeing you more and to welcoming you back to the United States and to Texas in particular. And thank you so much for joining us, Hamish.
No problem, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Wining and Dining with Jim White.